All right, well, welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. This is part two, promised part two, with James Leigh out of Edmonton, Alberta. We're going to be continuing our conversation. Now, if you've missed part one, you really don't need to listen to it because both parts are standalone. However, if you'd like to go ahead and listen to part one, we will have a link for that in the comments or our description box for you for ease and convenience. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Candice Smiley. Here we trust the ningle and we tell the truth. This is a podcast. We are looking to have conversations that matter, conversations that take courage to engage in, where we cut through the noise that exists online to bring you incredible content, amazing speakers and stories to inspire you to live your best, listen to yourself, and tell the truth of who you are and who you just might become. Okay, so one of the reasons why you and I got together was a book. No More Mr. Nice Guy. Remember that? That's a few years ago.
Yeah, I think I read it and shared it with you. Is that right?
No, you read it, shared it with a friend, our mutual friend.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And I wanted to borrow the book. And then we met for sandwiches and the rest is history.
We met for sandwiches. We did.
We did.
Yes. Okay, so what do I think about that book? I like
No More Mr. Nice Guy. Well, I like this book.
Well, I think, sorry?
Go ahead. I like this book.
I think there should be a subtitle underneath that. And this doesn't mean be an asshole.
Yes, but let's explain what a nice guy means, because a lot of people who have listened to my podcast have heard me talk about the word nice and how it means stupid and some of this stuff. And this book really impacted this whole idea I have about being a nice person and nice guys. And
yeah, well, I think the current vernacular for that is simp, right? So simpering idiot would be the short or long form of simp, right? And sometimes people think of that in terms of dating. So men who simp and just like say to girls, "You're right, you're always right." Oh wow, they secretly hate, like, I don't know, shellfish or whatever, but they go out for shellfish dinners because she likes shellfish dinners, and he's saying, okay, I'll eat it too. Meanwhile, he's running to the bathroom halfway through barfing. Instead of just going, I'm not really into shellfish. You have that and I'll have steak, right?
Yes.
It's that idea of just always saying yes to everything. And then even more importantly from that book, now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking about it, is the idea of covert contracts.
Right? Yes. Yes.
So covert agreements, when you say to somebody, oh yeah, or not say to them, but you do certain things, right? I think this happens a lot in like sexless marriages where men, they hear somewhere, oh, well, it's because you're not helping out with the dishes and washing the floors and doing enough with the childcare and stuff like this. And if you do that, she'll probably get in the mood more often. And so he's got this social contract in his mind. He's thinking, I'm going to do all this stuff. So he maybe does it for a week or 2 weeks or even just 2 days. And then he's like going, hey, where's the action, baby? Right? And she's not interested.
She's like, what? But she had no idea. Yeah.
Right. It's like, don't have this contract, together. And by the way, that brings up another thing that, genuine desire cannot be negotiated. I'm sorry, it just isn't. Like you build genuine desire between two people. You don't contract it. You don't go, oh, once a week we're going to feel like really incredibly interested in each other. It's not going to happen that way, right?
You don't think so? You don't think, is there any merit though, do you think, to scheduling some specific time to be intimate?
Well, date nights for sure.
Okay.
And I think that I think date nights, and we've talked about this, I think people go out on date nights after having not been romantic with each other for a really long time, and they expect it to be like great the first time, and when it sucks, which it will, they go, that sucked, I'm never doing that again. And it's like, well, that's like going skiing for the very first time and falling on your face and wondering why didn't that go well, and never skiing again for the rest of your life. It's like, maybe you need some practice, maybe you're out of practice, maybe you need to learn some skills, maybe you need to be a better listener, etc.
Maybe
things like that.
So were you a nice guy once?
Hell yeah. Right? I think we've all been interested in somebody whether it was relationship wise, whether it was romantic or even just a friendship, and you're like, oh, you're fanboying over somebody, you're fangirling over somebody. You're like, oh, they're so cool. And then you just, if they, whatever they say, yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. And it just becomes a really boring kind of a interaction because there's no conflict. And conflict sounds like a rough word, but it's not. Whenever there's something that you can like, little rough edges that you can work on and you can talk about it makes it interesting, right?
Very, very interesting. But I really love this book. I think I've given away 9 to date.
Oh wow,
Men and women, but mostly
that's
men.
significant. Yeah.
Well, you start to hear the same things and start to see patterns and start to recognize it. And I just think about some of the men I've had the most conflict with were definitely nice guys. And rather than showing up in their masculine energy or really taking the time to think about that or work on that, which sort of leads itself to my next question, because obviously I don't know how to put this, not really necessarily a man's man, but you're definitely in your masculine and comfortable there.
Mm-hmm.
And, so quite comfortable with the play between men and women. And I think a lot of times women are trying to be men and men are, well, we won't go into that today. But what do you find in terms of having read that now, looked in some of this covert contract, ended those covert contracts, started to communicate more? What's been the impact?
Well, it's better. I mean, relationships are better overall because you don't have anybody, and we all, as a recovering nice guy, I'll call it that, because we all have a tendency to try and get along well, right? And by default, I'm a very polite person and I'm affable and I'm quite agreeable, right? So,
generally.
Yeah, generally, right? Not always, but generally. So the problem with those little micro disagreements is that there's a little bit of rough starts here and there, right?
Sure.
But what happens is, I think that with people, especially long-term relationships, all those little things that you deal with, it's like, okay, well, like if you're honest about things, or you say, if someone says to me, oh, the age-old question between a man and a woman looks at her husband and says, do you think I'm getting chubby? Right? And the guy goes, no, honey, no, that's fine. Well, if inside he's actually thinking, yeah, you're kind of getting chubby, and maybe he's losing attraction for her, then is that good for both of them? Or wouldn't it be better if he said, oh, honey, like, you feel like you're getting chubby? If you're asking for my objective opinion, you're bigger than you were last week, right? That's an honest answer, and maybe you're not. And I just danced around it a little bit to not use the word chubby, right? But yeah, she's getting bigger, right? Or maybe he's getting bigger. Maybe it's like, yeah, you're bigger, maybe you want to do something about that.
One of the things I appreciate the most about not having a covert contract or living from the space of hell yes or hell no is if you're working with somebody or chatting with somebody and they're going to tell you the truth. I like that better. It's better to hear a truth that feels uncomfortable, especially if you're asking for it. Because usually if you're asking for it, you're looking in the mirror and knowing you're, in your example, not as slim as you were the week before. And what you're looking for might be, like you said, the question, do you feel that way? What mirror can I be for you in this relationship, rather than the ones, oh, no, it's, or, you're still beautiful. That's not necessarily what we're asking for in that moment. It might be, yes, babe, I'm noticing a few extra pounds. Do we need to make some time so that you can go and work them off? Or are you comfortable in your new face? Like, I like the fact that the people who are not choosing to be people pleasers tell me the truth. And I find maybe it's my personality, maybe it's because I'm a closer, not 100% sure, but I don't always find that people are honest with me. And that was never an issue. You always told me the truth, which made me go, excuse me? Pardon? But I appreciate that, because you don't wonder what the other person's thinking. And we're always communicating from that space of subconscious, where your subconscious is asking, are they lying to me? And if they're,
and I think, yeah.
Go ahead, jump in. No, jump in.
Well, okay, so that could be tough for some people, because they're like, oh, if there's a conflict here, because they're invested in the other person being happy with their response, right?
But that's another covert contract. I will do these things and stand on my head and look a certain way in order to make you happy, rather than really taking the time to look at it and go, actually, I'm really more comfortable in this particular phase and I'd like to maintain this. Or, sorry, carry on.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, so you build up this false image of who you are
Yes.
to the other person. And then when you finally start asserting some of the things that you actually think to that person, they find out that you're not the person they thought you were. How many times have we heard that phrase? He wasn't who I thought he was, right? Or she wasn't who I thought she was. Well, just be who you are in the start. And then, well, maybe it means you're not going to be with that person, but you're going to be with somebody who's okay with who you are, right? It's like a dating app, you know, and people say, I'm athletic and I like to go running and I do all this stuff. And you find out that, you know, they actually don't do any of that stuff. It's like, oh, I'm with, all right, I guess this is not going to go further. But finding out sooner is better, or negotiating things with that person based on the differences in the beginning, right, is better too, because then, you know, you don't have to keep going back and negotiating the same thing over and over again.
Over and over and over again. Yeah. Which I think for most people they would prefer. But we have as a society, I think, this idea that if we're alone, it's not a good thing. Whereas if you read a book like this or books that are similar, there certainly are ones for women as well. It essentially leads you to really get clear on who you are, you know, to use a very feminine term, fall in love with yourself, but to really have that self-respect, I think, more than anything else, that why would I, you know, choose to change who I am to be with a particular person just so that I'm not lonely?
Or
Or
maybe it also encourages someone to say, I have these deficiencies. This has exposed it to me. I am now aware of these deficiencies. I'm going to go to work. And I guess that goes back to our earlier conversation about reinventing oneself.
But this is a Candice and James conversation. Oh, look, we've looped all the way back around. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that book. I think that's a great one. What was the other thing on the next one on the list?
Well, I wanted to know what other favorite books you had. You had put a couple of books, but you and I have read a couple of books that we've really enjoyed, especially along those lines of like No More Mr. Nice Guy and some of these communication ones. So in that line, what are some other books that you've read out here?
Well, I think The Four Agreements, which you brought to my attention, which is
that's
an excellent book, right?
I love that book.
You know, I mean, I can now that I brought it up, can I list all the four agreements, right? So
that's usually me.
So,
be impeccable with your word.
Yeah, be impeccable with your word.
Yep.
Don't assume, right? I think Don't assume was one of them.
Yep. Always do your best.
Always do your best.
Nothing anyone does is because of you.
Okay, that's I definitely would have forgotten that one. But I think that, you know, be impeccable with your word was a really important one. I just think that book is good, right? I mean, again, it goes back to presenting the person that you actually are to people, right? And you know, the four, that's a good one. Don't assume, like, don't make an assumption. Like, if you think somebody doesn't like you, you may be wrong. Maybe they're looking at you from, you know, you might be looking at them from afar and being admired. And they might see something in you that they wish they had, and that causes them to look at you a certain way, and you're like, that person doesn't like me, but you're wrong, maybe.
Do you find that assumption and covert contracts really comes up in the online dating? And I'm just curious.
In online dating, okay. So in my very limited online dating experience,
well, you know, we've discussed this before, and I've often been curious about the whole idea of it, right? Little tiny picture, which we've talked about, you know, that what are the stats? You know, obviously women have way more pickings, and we're only talking to a certain number
women
of people.
Swipe right 15% of the time.
Right.
And as low as 5% of the time, depending on the dating app.
Right.
And men swipe right 50% of the time.
Right.
So men are like, oh, she seems nice. Okay. She seems nice. Okay. And women are much more critical of the choices that they have available. So.
This is true. What I always found was interesting is how do you, you know, sum up who you are in this little tiny bio, in this little tiny space, and how you and I were talking, I think it was last week, about, you know, choosing certain images can affect, I think, whether or not someone swipes left or right. And how, you know, it's basically your resume. Do you find that people are treating it that way? Because that was never my experience. It was like, let's put my best foot forward. And I was like, yes, and you got to be honest about, you know, work experience. Like, where were you? Then there was a gap.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a few different things. So, all right. So yeah, it's a resume for sure. It's a dating resume. It's like, if you date me, this is what, you know, you can expect to see, find, you know, about me, right?
Yes.
And so if you're honest and truthful in that resume, then the person looking at that resume is more likely to, find the same person show up at the date as they saw in the app, right?
Yes.
Now,
Let's
having
hope.
said that, there's a lot of men who have said, and women too, I think, right, who said, well, nobody swipes on my dating app. I don't get to meet people, or I don't get to do this. Maybe they just don't know how to pick the right pictures, the ones that that represent who they are in truth, and also make them look good to the other person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Make them enticing, and they're like, oh, I like this person. Yeah, she's interesting, right? Or he's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that.
Well, because it's weird when you show up and somebody different shows up. Right?
I can only imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, you look and you're like, that picture must be 10 years old. Or, I guess
But
you
I
really
see
like
that on
picture.
billboards with people in business. I'm like, I know you took that 10 years ago. You
feel
do not
the same
look
way
like
about, well, why would they put that picture up? Like, I guess that goes back to, well, okay, that's an overall conversation we could have. Like, why does Wayne Newton, or why, dye his hair black and use spray in hair? Like, I mean, just, dude, cut your hair and let it go silver and adopt a look that matches how old you are, because you are older, right? Actually, in all fairness to Wayne Newton, he might not be alive anymore. I don't know. He's probably a really great guy. But my point is, I actually saw the man in Vegas one time, and I was like, holy cow, he looks like he's just trying too hard. I just thought, wow, he's trying too hard. And when I see a guy, and I've done this, okay, I dyed my hair when I first started getting gray hair, right?
That's so sad.
And I didn't like finding the gray hairs, and it got to a point where it was like, oh, this is just a waste of my time. I'm wasting time doing this. So I just embraced who I was and said, okay, I'll cut my hair to suit me. And, you groom yourself so that you look good, right? I think that makes sense. I'm not a big fan of a lot of artificial things, right? I guess if a person has some really good hair plugs done, well, then it's really hair. Okay. Right? Yes. I guess then it's really hair, and they really can comb it and cut it and do whatever they're doing. But would I ever wear a wig? No, I wouldn't wear a wig.
I might. Depends on the day. Pardon the interruption while you're listening to our show. I do hope you are enjoying the content that we are sharing with you today. This is a sponsored advertisement from Phos4AI. This is an online service that will save you hours of time with your content creation. So this is really important for me to share, because you guys know, having listened to the podcast for a while, that words matter. So this is really a time-saving device. I am stoked about being able to promote it to you. If you are looking to have a blog, or you have a website, or you regularly create posts, and you need to be able to add written word to increase your value, to add to your impact, and to add to your credibility, really, you simply type in your title, and the AI software goes to work and gives you high quality original articles. So that's exciting. You do need to review the article, and it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, they say, to make necessary edits. Of course, add in your own flair, maybe an intro and an outro or something like that. But you get 3 free articles just for creating an account and signing up. After that, if you want to pay for the service, it's a monthly service. And to be honest with you, I have spent some really decent money both on copywriters and on copywriters from Fiverr who are creating blog posts for me. And frankly, these blogs have triple the number of words. And so pretty stoked about that. It is an online monthly subscription service. If you do decide that you're going to do that, you can use code RIPPLE 2022. So that's Ripple 2022. And you will get 5 free articles on top of those 3. So that's 8 free articles just for signing up and getting your paid account. Why waste time writing content for yourself when you can get Phos4AI to do it for you? Try out their service today and see how much time it can save you. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the show. You love to listen to podcasts. And I want to showcase a couple of them because you've introduced me to a couple of them, and I feel like you're often the person. If there's a text message coming in, it's like, check out this.
Hey, check out this one. Yeah. So which were some of them?
Order of Man.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna bring that one up. Okay,
I am, because we've had some interesting debates listening to Order of Man.
Yeah, well, okay. So I would personally put a caveat here right now that just because a person avidly listens to a podcast doesn't mean that they agree with everything the podcaster says.
100%.
So I listen to Joe Rogan all the time.
Right.
And sometimes I think Joe Rogan's high as F and shouldn't have said that, right? You know? And other times I think, wow, that was a really great stream of questioning. So with Order of Man, that's a very conservative guy.
Yes.
You know, but he's really interested in what makes a man, and not just, you know, any kind of man, but a good man, right? So a person who doesn't have covert contracts. So he likes to interview the best men that he can find. So people he can respect.
We could even change that phrase around to be men who are choosing to be their best.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure there's some women in there as well, but it's people who are really choosing to step into those more traditionally masculine.
Well, in all fairness, he only has interviewed one woman.
Really?
His wife?
Yeah.
Right.
That was a good show. Yeah.
Very high regard and is very supportive of. So, you know, yeah, I like that podcast because it's about an exploration of what it means to be a man and to be the best man that you personally can be. And it's not about comparing yourself to other men. It's about comparison. Comparison? Is that a word? It's not a word.
No.
Comparing oneself to, you know, comparing you to yourself, right? And saying, how do I measure up compared to last week or last year or the year, you know? And can I look at that comparison and say, I'm happy with that comparison, right? You know, James of today could look at, like, one facet of my life is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's so much fun, right? And martial arts in general. And if I look at James from 7 or 8 years ago when I first started martial arts journey, you know, to James of now, I can see a big improvement, right? In a lot of areas, physical fitness and confidence and all sorts of things, and knowledge. And when I look at just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, testing yourself and going to competition and putting yourself in the arena, I think it's an important thing to be able to do. So yeah, that podcast supports all of those kinds of ideas, and I like that.
Any other ones top on your list?
Well, I like Joe Rogan, and I mentioned Joe Rogan for a reason, because I think that Joe Rogan gets vilified sometimes by people who don't like some of his guests. And again, I go back to the idea that just because you've had a conversation with somebody doesn't mean you agree with everything they've said, right? And one of the things that I think that Joe Rogan does well is he asks questions, and he's very curious. And a lot of times he plays ignorant on a subject, even though he has an opinion or has ideas or has done, like, you know, 100 other podcasts on that particular subject matter with somebody else. He asks questions, and then he listens to the responses and goes from there, and it makes it very interesting. I think he's a really good study on human interaction if you spend some time listening to the way that he talks to people. So yeah, he's very good, that one. I like that one.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson. Well, okay, so I like Jordan Peterson. One of the things I really like about Jordan Peterson is he's thoughtful. So if somebody challenges something that he says, he thinks about it. And when he speaks, he's very careful about his words. I've, you know, listened to a lot of hours of Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, when someone asks him a question, he thinks out loud and he stops in the middle of what he's saying and saying, that's an interesting thought. I'm thinking about this. Okay, this is what I'm thinking right now. And he builds on that, right? So if he's not, a lot of time we're all doing that. Like, any conversation you have is an improvisation of the thoughts in your head spilling out of you based on the question you've been provided with, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that improvisation is based on all of the information you have and other thoughts that you've had about it before, and it comes out. Well, Jordan Peterson qualifies those thoughts as they're coming out and says, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Just a minute. Okay, this is what I think and this is why. And you can tell he's digging into his subcategories on that subject matter and kind of building premises up and then saying, okay, this is why I think that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I like that. But I think that generally his message is pretty much, don't lie. So be truthful to people, even if it's hurtful to be truthful sometimes. Try and find a way to give the truth without being hurtful, but be honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do your best to improve yourself. And instead of running around and trying to tell everybody in the world how they're doing everything wrong, take a look at yourself first. And I think that's a lesson that we could really learn right now. There's a lot of banging, and we won't go deep down to that road, but there's a lot of people, painting targets on other people and yelling, "You're not great because of this."
Yes.
And I have to ask, this is the one I always trot out, but it's kind of funny. You probably heard me say this before. When's the last time you went to that old neighbor of yours and did their walks? Right? If you want to improve the world, why don't you start in a small way with something right in front of you and do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Your neighbor just had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
Bring a casserole over, right? Something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody's a little down and out. Take them out for coffee.
Yep.
Right? Or go to an old folks home and read some books with some seniors that have Alzheimer's and just want to have some interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I think of that, and I think instead of railing against somebody who's like just a nice person trying to get through their day, and for whatever perceived infraction you have about them.
Anybody else?
Well, of course, the Candice Smiley create the Ripple podcast.
You actually listen, which I appreciate.
Yeah. So going back to you're curious.
Very.
You ask questions and you listen to the answers, and then you respond to those answers. And I think that's very good.
Thank you.
And your questions are good. And you have a comfortable way of getting the conversation to flow, and to find out from the person you're interviewing what they think about things. So some podcasters I've noticed do a lot of talking, right? And actually the Order of Man. So there's different facets to that podcast, right? He has Friday Field Notes where he just spews his ideas out and he says, "Oh, this is what I think," and it's a monologue essentially, right? And then he has the interview podcast, and I think that there's a space for both.
I do.
Yeah,
I do too. Anything else? I know you've been deep into your martial arts in one way or another, and I think that that's always inclined you to be more disciplined than others. One of the things that's always set you apart in my mind is how disciplined you are, and you really do prioritize self, which is not something that a woman is generally very good at least I haven't been. And you seem to have a way of saying, this is important to me, I'm making time for this. And that's, I think, a very masculine trait, but it's also something that I enjoy talking about because I think it was a very conscious decision for you, especially from that shift from nice guy into what am I actually going to get value from, and where do I want to spend my time? Because we know time is the non-renewable resource.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah. And I appreciate your comment about me being a disciplined person. Certainly there's different times in my life when I've been more or less disciplined also, right?
Yes, but you play the guitar and you're actively working on that. You've worked your way through various levels of Kung Fu and now into things like, Jiu-Jitsu, where there's a consistent practice. And I've certainly seen, I don't want to put any generation down necessarily, but some generations are better at this disciplined practice, this, practice of being disciplined than other ones are. And that's very much what I see from you.
No, thanks. Well, and I think maybe even if we didn't tag it about generations, but just people, like some people you could see like their efforts are not spent on improvement, their efforts are spent on access or visibility. I think that they're really interested in having people notice them.
Yes.
As opposed to improving what they're doing, and maybe some of those are going hand in hand, right?
Maybe.
I mean, some of the really cool things like on Instagram, you'll see some, or a TikTok dancer. I mean, everybody likes to make fun of the TikTok dancers, okay? But some of these people are really good dancers, right?
And
And
some
you
of
just
them are
have to
making a
go,
lot of money doing TikTok dances, like, man who live in the glass house, should change in the basement kind of a thing, like before you go and, that's a big deal anyway.
right, yeah. So, even them, I have to say, well, what are they doing? Is there a value there,
Maybe.
right? And how are they improving what they're doing? Yeah, probably they're doing a good job of that. So yeah. Other podcasts I like the Rubin Report. I think Dave Rubin's really smart.
Okay.
I like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro's a smart guy. A lot of people hate him because he has some views.
He's scary. But
Ben
we'll save that for
Shapiro
another show.
he's a very, very good debater.
He
And
is.
he's spent a lot of time thinking about his points of view. And occasionally people accuse him of punching down. But what I've noticed with Ben Shapiro is that he doesn't do any of that punching unless you're punching him.
Mm.
So I've noticed that the people who generally get that are the people who yell at him or insult him or call him names instead of just debating the points.
Well, and I think too, I don't want to dive too much into that on this particular show. We'll have you back and we'll talk more about stuff like that. But, it goes back to what we've talked about earlier, where just because I have a different idea than you, it doesn't mean I need to vilify you.
Right.
We can agree to disagree.
Yep.
And that can be really hard for people because some of the issues that we're debating in the world these days are very, very polarizing. They're very, very emotionally charged. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of, I'm going to say smaller people or other people who are really being hurt by some of these big decisions rather than choosing to come together to continue to debate. Or as you and I have talked about, what if we chose to get on other sides and try to see the other side, try to argue from that point, because can we get closer? And I think that's something that we hear certainly from Peterson, we hear from some of these other people, the negotiation book, right?
Well,
If
and
we
can we steel man the other person's position?
Yeah.
In other words, can we accurately state it back to the other person so that they go, yeah, you are talking about what I'm
talking
saying.
about.
You're not misrepresenting my position, right? And so if you can say, well, this is what I think you think, is that correct? And the other person goes, yeah, that's what I think. Well, okay, you're right. I think that's a start. I think that's a really good start. To get back to a podcast I really like, I'm yanking the horse's face.
Go for it. That's okay. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Dan Carlin's Hardcore History on Spotify. Wow. If you want to know something about people, motivations, history, and have it be a really holistic presentation, check out Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. That guy is brilliant. If you listen to him talking about any part of history, I got my first taste of it was listening to him talk about the Roman Celtic genocide. So the Romans killed a bunch of Celts, right? Which were basically Europeans,
Sure.
right? But that's what a Celt was back then. The way he spoke about it on the readings, and he takes things from all sorts of references. So he's not just referencing one side's opinion of history, right? He was talking about the Middle East and the Pacific Theater and Japan and the rise of imperialism. That was a really, really long series, 6 series of podcasts that were several hours each. And they were pulling out letters from, mothers of soldiers, of Japanese soldiers, and same with American soldiers. And they were, pulling out, notes in people's diaries and things like that. So it's very interesting. It's excellent book, excellent podcast rather.
So in the beginning, I read through your bio, which had 2 of your favorite books. If there was one book that someone who listened to this wanted to pick up and read, which book would you recommend?
Oh man, I think that's a really hard one.
For those who were
What
listening,
did I write in my bio? Which
well, you're an avid reader, which is true. You had talked about most recently you read Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell and Stephen King's The Shining.
Oh yeah, okay. So The Shining was just pure popcorn for the brain, and I read it because Yeah, because my daughter Summer had read some Stephen King and loves Stephen King, and I had never actually read that book, even though I've read several of his others. And so that was on my list as something I recently read, and so I was just putting it out there. And the other one that I mentioned,
Basic Economics.
Yeah, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. I think there are a lot of people who could just
benefit.
It would be really good for them to read about basic economics, and that one talks about supply and demand. It talks about all sorts of policies and things that people bring in order to sort of gerrymander some certain things that are seen as problematic, and how that actually creates more problems, because there's always additional consequences to the things you do. You know, anytime that you put you corral behavior with restraints and things like that, you create a whole set of other behaviors that maybe you hadn't considered, and so those can be economic behaviors. And so I think he does a good job in that book, and he's written a lot of books. He's a very prolific writer and very intelligent man. Really, really interesting. Yeah.
Cool. So when I did a little reading of your bio, I talked about if somebody was in Edmonton, that you would be the person that they should look up to know of a good place to have food. You really enjoy food. And I said, yes, that's true. You also enjoy a really good cup of coffee. So let's say someone's listening in and they're from Edmonton, because we do have some local listeners. Where would be your favorite place for a cup of coffee?
I'll give you 2 or 3. I'll start with my very favorite cup of coffee, and my very favorite cup of coffee is Credo coffee. Credo coffee is delicious. It's absolutely delicious. And it's not pretentious. You walk in and you pay for your coffee. Well, okay. So there's some places where you can go for a coffee, and it's like there's somebody acting kind of like a scientist over there on the side doing some stuff, and they're making it look like a big show, and it cost you $9 for a cup of coffee that didn't taste much better than someplace else, right? Sure. So I'm not a huge fan of that kind of a thing, the theater of coffee. Some people love the theater of coffee. I don't give a crap. Give me a good cup of coffee. Okay. So
number 1, number 2.
Credo does that. Credo's very, very good. Iconoclast coffee.
I don't think I've been.
Okay. No, they're a smaller spot. They're on 121st Street and 102nd Ave.
Okay.
And they're great. Service is excellent. The food's good. You go in there, and by the way, not only do you get a good cup of coffee, you can get one of the best hamburgers in town.
Oh, look at that.
Really good. Get their cheeseburger with fries.
Okay.
Just do it.
Number 3?
Number 3, Ace Coffee.
Oh, I do like Ace. Ace is good.
Ace Coffee. And you can buy that all sorts of places in town, because they supply a bunch of places. They supply Pip. They supply the
that explains
Bureau
a lot.
downtown.
Pip is good.
Yeah. That's how I discovered them.
Okay.
Right. So I had a coffee at Pip. Great place to go eat. Go to Pip. And they had coffee, and I just wanted a coffee that day. And they had, well, no, I had a meal too. Yeah, but I wanted a coffee, and I saw that they had Ace Coffee. I said, "Where's your coffee from?" It was Ace Coffee. Delicious coffee. It's really good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me today for a very
fun,
wandering conversation. And that was good.
Awesome. Thank you, Candice.